So, 10 surprising things about Victorian literature so far. This is part encouragement for you to read Victorian fiction if it isn't really a time era you've read in. It's also a catch up of my DIY literature degree because I've had a focus on Victorian literature since the beginning of the year, and just a third of the way through the year catch up really. So I have been reading and loving Victorian fiction since really probably last November, really focusing on it since January, as much as my life will allow anyway. And I was thinking about how is it going and giving you guys a catch up, and I thought I would bring those 10 surprising things that for me so far early on in my Victorian reading, they're things that have really surprised me. So this is my list. So firstly, I think how accessible the language is. I was really expecting it to be like a real, come on, let's get to the grindstone and let's work this book out. But to be honest, I haven't found that at all. These have just felt like fantastic stories, and there's been no problem at all with the language. So I think they're not scary. I don't think Victorian books are in any way, shape or form scary. So if you are not reading or trying Victorian literature because you're a bit put off thinking it might be scary, it's really not. Let's go back to 2 rereads I did in November. I reread Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. These were previously 2 of my very favourite Victorian literature reads. I reread them last November and just loved them. And I think that the language in Wuthering Heights, especially on, I think this was a 4th reread for me of Wuthering Heights, it just read like a fantastic easy story to read. There are probably a few issues with names that are similar in Wuthering Heights that I remember when I first picked up this book I found tricky. But generally the language is just like a modern day book. Same with Jane Eyre, really accessible. If this is a stumbling block for you and you are really worried about the language or the possible difficulty of language in a Victorian classic, Jane Eyre is a great place to start. I would say more than Wuthering Heights because of all those names being similar. So a great place to start. My main read for January, February and March was this great big tome, Charles Dickens, David Copperfield. This, the first big full-length Charles Dickens novel I'd ever read. I'd read a few of the Christmas tales, Christmas Carol before. I'd played the violin for Oliver Twist as well, so being involved in all of those stage productions. But for big full-length novels, this was the first one, and I absolutely and utterly adored it. And the language in here is just so accessible and so easy. Again, although it's a long book, because it's all first person narrative and all of those plots and counterplots and subplots and character stories that evolve in a Dickens novel, they're all grounded in that first person narrative of David Copperfield. It keeps it very easy to understand. It's all from his viewpoint. So David Copperfield, although it's a long one, it's a great place to start as well with David Copperfield if you are worried about getting lost in the language at all. So first surprise, the language is wonderful and accessible. Before I move on, how did I cope with any words that I didn't know? Because you're not going to know them all. Well, a lot of these have loads of notes at the back that are all numbered. I didn't necessarily stop to check every note that there was a number on, but sometimes I was intrigued if it was a slightly different word that I'd never heard before. Some of them I did stop, not all of them, and I think that's fine, but some of them I did stop and check the notes. My favourite new word that I discovered from January reading Victorian literature is nosegay. What on earth is a nosegay? A nosegay is a little small bouquet, like a posy, of flowers, often fragrant. used as a gift, a nosegay. I loved that word. But you don't have to stop and check all the words. Victorian literature does not need a language guide alongside the book for you to be able to read it just fine. Point number 2, I am utterly surprised by how gorgeous and heartfelt and tear-jerking and fabulous Dickens is. I'm surprised. Now, Charles Dickens is one of my key authors to focus on in my Victorian study. The aim is to read all of Dickens' novels. Until January, I'd only read 2 of the tales in the Christmas books of Charles Dickens. I'd read A Christmas Carol and I'd read The Chimes as well, which I read last year. Quite a unpopular opinion, I think. I don't really like A Christmas Carol very much, and I've heard people say A Christmas Carol is very indicative of what Charles Dickens' writing is and feels like to read. So I had a few apprehensions about that. When you are told that this shorter novella length tale just sums up his writing and you don't particularly like it that much, it gets a bit tricky. So I picked up David Copperfield. Why did I start with this when I didn't know anything about it? It was the one that I found in a charity shop for 30p. So I started with this thinking, gosh, is this now going to be over 800 pages of stuff I don't like very much? But to say that I was surprised by how emotionally heartfelt and engrossing and absorbing and fantastic to read this book would be an understatement. I am easy to cry. I'm very easy to cry in life, in reading, in all things. But this book made me cry so many times. And I have to admit, I read the last 3 chapters, all of the last 3 chapters, with tears dripping off my nose. Not because the last 3 chapters are particularly sad, but simply because I know the book was coming to an end and I did not want this to end. I didn't want it to end. I know sometimes when you're reading a book this length, people will say, oh, it's overly long, it's Charles Dickens, too many words. But I did not want it to end. It could have been another 400 pages and I would have happily have read it. It was wonderful. Why was it so wonderful? The characters, Peggotty, I think will be my all-time favourite character for a long time. I loved Peggotty. I loved all the Peggotty family. I loved the setting. I loved them on the boat. I loved all the character arcs. I just loved this slow progress with David Copperfield through his life and the way all the stories were told and the different characters and the different levels of goodness and how that played out and how you could see the exploitation of David and then him coming through and out the other side. The character arc of the aunt, oh my gosh, I could go on forever. There were so many wonderful things in this book. Other books, let's give you an update. I then went on to read Bleak House. You can see another battered old charity shop copy. That doesn't matter, it's what's inside that counts. Again, with Bleak House, another 800 pages of absolute goodness and characters that just fill your soul and settings and ghost walks. Really vibrant exploration of marriage and the way Victorian law worked and relationships and gender roles. Just fascinating and heartfelt. Again, emotional and heartfelt. This month I've just finished A Tale of Two Cities. I again was a bit worried about this because this is slightly different. This is Charles Dickens writing a historical novel centred around the brutality of the French Revolution. Would I like this so much? Would we depart from those kind of family character settings of a Victorian London? Would it affect the way I loved the book? It was different, but my goodness, it was still full of emotion, it was still heartfelt. And I think the last third of the book, it read like the most gripping page turner you could possibly imagine. I read it like gripping my face and wondering what was going to happen next. Fantastic. So how much I love Charles Dickens. These have been 3 5-stars, guys. All 3 are 5 stars, easy. I'm surprised at that. So that's been fantastic. So I would say don't be put off by length, don't be put off by people saying like his language is wordy. Just pick up a Charles Dickens book and read it. So the third thing that I'm surprised about is the genres in Victorian fiction. I don't quite know what I was expecting. I think you say Victorian literature and it kind of all gets clumped in together. In my mind, I have visions of ladies in big dresses and like the men ruling the world, and like ladies just sewing, not being as important in stories. But like I started with the Brontes. I think the Victorian age is an age where the woman's voice is heard very clearly. And not all Victorian novels are the same. They're not all weak women being led by men, which I think that's what I thought it was. I cannot believe the genres that are in Victorian fiction. It is literally like where we are now, but further back in time. So if you want to read a historical novel, if historical novels are what you love, I've just literally a few days ago finished this. It's a historical novel. The most amazing, gripping, brutal descriptions of the French Revolution and what happens when a society treads the poor to such an extent that the whole system erupts. And the introduction of the guillotine, my goodness me, was so gripping and such an amazing depiction of a historical event. So if you like historical fiction, it's there. In March, I had Wilkie Collins' March. I read The Woman in White and I read The Moonstone. Fantastic book. This is often described as the very first detective novel trying to track down a missing Indian jewel, with an amazing setting of quicksands, but a mystery to decipher. A fantastic mystery. Again, The Woman in White, gothic mystery as well. If you like a sensational mystery or gothic mystery, you've got it in Wilkie Collins. If gothic or gothic horror or moving more towards horror is more of your thing, I read Dracula in February, first time I'd ever read it. Oh my goodness me, I loved this. So Victorian Gothic is huge. You've got Victorian Gothic in Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights as well. So whatever is your idea of the genre that you like, you can find it in Victorian fiction. And for me, I think that really surprised me. The fourth surprise for me is around the Bronte sisters novels. Not only do I want to read Charles Dickens this year, but I have another focus on the Brontes. For years I've always said The Wuthering Heights is my all-time favourite book. I hadn't read many classics before the start of this year. I read Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights both as a young teenager. Like I said, this has been read, I think, twice. This has been read 4 times. I didn't think anything could knock these two down from their pedestal. Surprise number 4 is that they have both been knocked off their pedestals. Which book, I hear you cry? It's another Bronte novel. Obviously, I love the Brontes. This has been my gateway. I think the Brontes were my gateway into reading Victorian fiction. I read in February Villette by Charlotte Bronte. I'd never read it before. Like I said, I'd only read those other 2 books, and I was not expecting this book to do what it did to me. This book broke me in the best and the worst of ways, and I cannot stop thinking about it. I cannot get it out of my head. It follows the amazing Lucy Snow, who is a incredibly unreliable narrator. She travels to Belgium, I think it's Belgium, to work in a school teaching English. It's about loneliness, it's about mental health, it's about depression, it's about unrequited love, it's about tragedy, unspoken hinted at tragedy, and tragedy in real time. Again, you've got gothic elements in this, an amazing setting, but it was the depiction of loneliness that just, it literally broke me apart. And I think anybody that's experienced unrequited love or loneliness at times in their life, this is such a fantastic read. I loved Villette. I really loved it. And it went to my top spot. It knocked these two off the top spot. I could not believe it. I was so surprised. Currently, my current read at the moment, I am that far through The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. My first Anne Bronte, and again this one, boy oh boy, this one's great too. So I'm going to have this as point number 5. I am surprised that Anne Bronte matches up too, in my mind, as somebody that hasn't really been reading classics for a good 30 years. The Brontes for me were always Emily and Charlotte. I think probably for 20 years I even forgot that there was a third sister. I know that is bad to say, but it's only coming back to reading this year and wanting to focus on Victorian literature. I thought, oh yeah, there's Anne as well. I wonder what her books are like. Oh my gosh, Anne matters too. Anne is fantastic too. What I've read so far of this, I'm currently on page 159. It is spectacular. For somebody like myself that has lived through DV, wow, can I recognise everything in this book. This is, it literally feels like reading aspects of my own life that I escaped from. It's brilliantly done. Oh my gosh, the Bronte sisters were something else. Like I said, the Victorian women had amazing voices in this literary world, and Anne matters too. I'm thrilled about it, surprised and thrilled. I am not a horror reader. I will branch into the gothic because I love gothic settings. I love a bit of supernatural, anything more sort of horror end, the horror end of gothic. Not so sure about anything with like body horror as well, or blood or guts. Not so sure about it. So when I did a prompt of Fanguary for February and decided to read vampire fiction, when February hit, I thought to myself, what on earth have I done? What have I done? I don't even want to read any of these books. And I thought, I'm going to start with Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'm just going to get it read and get it out the way, and to say that I've read it and now I know what it's all about. This has probably been the most surprising book of the year so far for me, because there was a real reluctance to pick it up and open it and start it. I really thought I wouldn't like this book, I really didn't want to read it when February hit. In fact, I think if I hadn't have been doing my reading challenge, I don't think I would have read it. I'd have put it back on the shelf. But I read it, first book of February. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved the castle setting. I loved the loneliness. I loved the band of friends coming together against the odds. I loved the elemental aspects of the battle, like earth and wooden stakes and white roses. I loved all of that holy water, that elemental aspect. Loved it. I loved the shape-shifting element. I loved the way that women in the book had to step out of societal role to join the battle. I loved that. I got to the end of the book and I don't think I've ever been so surprised. I really did think this was fantastic. So much so that I then in February also went on to read Dracula, which is the prequel, and Dracula, which is the official sequel. This one I loved. This one not quite so much. I could have done without reading that. Dracula, though, I thought was fantastic. So if you are not a horror girly like me and you don't like anything too creepy, don't let that put you off. Dracula is fantastic. So that was a massive surprise as well. Also, I think it was quite surprising, sort of the format and the devices used in Victorian literature. First of all, things like unreliable narrators. I don't think I'd ever really focused on that before. Like in Villette, Lucy Snow is not reliable. She admits that she's withholding stuff from us as we read this book. We don't always feel like we're being told everything, and she's not even honest to herself really. She's very self-deprecating, and she won't even admit to herself at times what's really going on, let alone telling us, the readers, what's going on. And it's the first time really that had come into focus for me. And again, with the Moonstones, it's told through different points of view, and not everybody is being honest in this. So really, really interesting, the use of different narrators. Also, the use of letters and journal entries, like the Moonstone gives you different points of view, so it's all with different narrators. You've got a tale of two cities as well, different viewpoints in a tale of two cities, because it's literally being told between two different places, and you've got different narrators in this. I liked the different voices. You get it in Charles Dickens' Bleak House as well. You've got different tense changes so that you know who is speaking. It's either being told through the voice of Esther Summerson, or you've got a anonymous narrator giving a different viewpoint in a different tense, and I really liked that too. And of course, Dracula, you've got the whole book is told in letters or voice recordings or journal entries or even newspaper clippings, and I was surprised by how many different devices of structure and plot and grammar, and how the narrators have been played with in the novels that I've read so far. How vast a variety, even in these small amount of books that I've read, just what the variety is of that. I found that really surprising and fascinating. So I think that's a real plus point for reading a Victorian novel. There are so many different devices used, just like there are so many different genres of book. But if you've read one book and it's not really your cup of tea, pick up a different book, and it just might be just something that you end up loving. So I think there's just a vast opportunity to find books that you're going to love when you're focusing on Victorian literature. Another thing that I found surprising is how different books are when you're older or when you've left it a while. Like I said, I read Wuthering Heights when I was a young teenager. I think I tried again in my early 20s. I tried again in my late 20s, and then it sat unread until last November when I was 56. So the experience of reading this book at 56 to when I was 19, so vastly different. This is literally a different book now. The life experiences, my understanding, my readiness to read this sort of book just made it such a different reading experience. The same with Jane Eyre as well. I think reading this at 15 to reading this at 56, just it's like chalk and cheese. The book doesn't change, but you do, which in turn changes the book. I think that's what makes rereading so exciting. So don't be put off if you've read a book, say at 20, and you didn't think it was for you. Don't let that put you off rereading it or picking up a book from the same era, because these books books, they morph with you, they change, they grow up with you, they become different stories. I wonder whether a 20-year-old version of me would have been quite so broken at Villette as the 56-year-old version of me. I can say now for definite it would have been, no, the 19-year-old version of me might have thought this was a bit too slow, a bit too ploddy, a bit too depressing. The 56-year-old version of me just related so hard and just felt so strongly for Lucy Snow that it just wrapped itself into my very core of my being and broke me apart. It's surprising to revisit books years, decades on, and to see how different they've become. I think Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, because I started with 2 rereads for all of this Victorian fiction. I started with these 2. It just was it was an eye-opener actually, just how massively different the books do become. So that was surprising and wonderful, because it means the books on our shelves are evolving and changing with us. I think I am on point number 9. I think I am. Point number 9 that I'm really surprised about is just how many Victorian novels there are out there. Oh my gosh, BookTube is fantastic. I have to say a massive shout out here to the amazing Katie over at Books and Things, who has been my go-to guru source of all things Victorian literature. She is like the great shining sun of all things Victorian literature for me. She has put me in touch with great novelists, great novels, great works of art that I've never previously heard of before. Katie, since January, without her knowing it, has been pushing me down very many great literary rabbit holes, and it's been marvellous. I've loved it. I felt like Alice in Wonderland, just finding all of these incredible treasures, and there are just so many books to read. I did think, gosh, Victorian literature, that'll be probably 6 months and I'll be done. Oh no, I think I could do the next 20 years and would never be done. So if you are really interested in getting into Victorian literature, I will link Katie's channel. Although if you're watching me, I'm absolutely certain you know who Katie is already, but she has just been so fabulous, such a great helpful, wonderful, lovely channel to watch. So Katie, if you are watching, then thank you so much. So I'll link Katie in the description box. She's fabulous. And the last surprise number 10, is just how damn fast my bookcase can fill up with 3 charity shops around me that have very cheap second-hand books. So I have a charity shop down the road that sells 3 books for £1. The charity shop up the road, which used to be more expensive, has now changed it to 3 for £1 as well. And there is another charity shop that does 3 books for £2. There is another one actually quite close that does books for 50p each as well. So let me show you what I have read so far. This and Bronte isn't quite finished, so that's slightly exaggerated. So I've got all of those books, but let me quickly show you my bookcase here. If you fall down the Victorian literary rabbit hole, be prepared for a very small bookcase. And this bookcase was also from the charity shop. It was only £5. Just how quickly this bookcase is filled up. Are you ready? So we do have a few gaps because I have taken the books off for the video, but look at that, all the way down to the bottom we have a virtually full bookcase. And I do also have some Victorian books in the freezer that I've just found in the charity shop, and I also have a few Victorian books elsewhere. Oh my goodness me, just I've nearly filled a bookcase, guys, since January. So lots of great books have come into the collection, and I'm obsessed. I will actually admit it here, I am absolutely obsessed with reading Victorian fiction at the moment. it's all I want to read at the moment, to be honest. So another recap of what I've read so far. So I read Dracula, I've read David Copperfield, I've read Bleak House, I've read A Tale of Two Cities, I have read Villette this year, I have read The Moonstone this year, and I've read The Woman in White this year. So that's what's been actually read since January. So I'm doing all right, I think. I'm doing all right because I am reading other things as well. And it's been really good fun. If we're going back to November, we can also add in Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. Also, if we're going all the way back to November, we can add in The Picture of Dorian Gray, and we can also add in A Christmas Carol and the Chimes if we're going all the way back to November. Like I said, I'm reading The Tenant of Wildfowl Hall at the minute. Hopefully this will be finished by the end of the month, and I'm loving it. So Victorian literature, full of surprises. Do not be put off by language. Do not be put off thinking that it is a genre in its own right. It isn't. There are multiple genres within it. Don't be put off if you read a Victorian book 20 years ago and hated it and you don't want to read it again. I would hazard a guess that if you picked that very same book up again and reread it, you might just love it, even that same book. And if not, there are so many other books to choose from. Go and explore all the different plot structures, go and find the unreliable narrators and try and work out if you're being conned or lied to, or what information is being withheld from you. Go and find a collection of letters and journals that, when put together, make the most dynamic story you can imagine. Go and explore those Gothic Victorian settings as well. There is something for everybody. And go and be prepared to cry your eyes out because you fall in love with characters so hard you never want the book to end. It's been a surprising journey so far, but it's been really good. So thanks guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.